Chapter 135. Alden lay in a bed so perfectly molded to his body that moving seemed like it would be ungrateful. The healer had told him to pick any room he wanted in the hospital, and the one he'd chosen for himself was completely quiet and very dark except for a nightlight with a friendly pinkish-orange glow. This was the second time he'd woken. The first had been when the small oval drone assigned to him had started gently chirping to let him know it was time for him to take some potions. Even though he was sure it had only been minutes since his eyes closed, he'd obediently rolled over and accepted its offerings. After downing the drinkable ones, spraying the sprayable ones, and saying "Pierce" to every injector, he'd tucked himself right back in and fallen asleep again so quickly that he probably wouldn't have argued if someone had tried to convince him he'd dreamed the whole interruption. Now he was fully rested, but he had an urge to close his eyes again and pretend that he wasn't. The clean, peaceful room separated him from whatever reality was like out there right now. They hadn't sent anyone to poke at him, and nobody had come to deliver bad news. There was no blood here, very little pain, no burdens too heavy to bear. And instead of trying to kill him, the water ran harmlessly from the bathroom tap like water was supposed to. His only companion was a small snake who'd been upgraded to a square plastic tub with holes poked in the lid. While the brute doctor was bandaging Alden up after his shower last night, he had asked her if they had anything that snakes could live in, and he had gotten this. Plus a shallow lid he'd filled with water. The snake was mostly hiding in its bento cave in the corner rather than exploring the larger container. Alden understood. Here in his own hiding spot there wasn't even a window to expose him to the outside world. A fake one could be created along the wall to his left. He knew because it had been active when he first entered the room. But he'd turned it off with a simple verbal request and now the wall stood there, solid and comforting in its plainness. I should want to get up and find out what's happened. To Zoraida, to Unzidora, to Earth, to everyone. He didn't. This reminds me of something. He pursued the feeling because doing so gave him another excuse not to leave the bed. Yeah. There it is. When he'd been a child in the House of Healing, after his parents' deaths, there had been a stretch of time like this. An hour when he'd started to suspect the terrible truth. Why aren't they here with me when I'm hurt, and why won't anyone answer my questions with answers that make sense? But he didn't actually know yet. Until you knew for sure, there was a chance that everything was what you wanted it to be. This moment was like that. Like the room was protecting him from whatever came next. How bad do I really think it all is then? Logically, the world was still out there. Moving along. If Earth Evac had gone forward while he slept, he was reasonably sure somebody would have woken him. So it was less terrible than that at least. Maybe it's not even very bad. He didn't believe that. He just had the sick fear in his gut that something he cared about would be broken. Something would have been taken. He had never known of tragedy to leave him out when it came to things like this. Zoraida. I've lost my sense of her. Does that mean? Or something will have gone wrong back in Chicago. Or someone will have noticed my area, a doctor here, a shirty, a drone I didn't see while I was breaking into that house. After catastrophizing in that vein for a while, the bed didn't feel nearly as comfortable. With a sigh, he rolled out and let his feet, one bare, one squish-booted, hit the cold tile floor. He went about every chore he could find for himself slowly. Taking stock of his injuries occupied several minutes. The left hand had been doused in ointment and recovered with the exact same kind of grabby-sucky bandage as before. He'd been told it would need more attention when he woke up. The foot in the squish boot would probably be staying in the squish boot for a couple of days. It was a dynamic gel cast very similar, in appearance at least, to the one he'd seen Stuart wearing at Leaf Song. Niato healing footwear. It held everything in place, and Alden could put weight on it without feeling like he was putting much weight on it. Though that did make working odd, like he had an appendage that wouldn't give him the right feedback even as he did all of the usual things with it. The shoulder was doing a lot better already, and everything else was just a mess of scrapes and bruises. He'd gotten one look at the side of his face that had been dragged across pavement and rooftop, and he was really glad that they'd covered it with bandaging. He looked like he'd made enemies with a cheese grater. What was the point of letting Roro rid you of a lifetime's worth of damage if you were just going to beat yourself up like this? Finally, Alden tried to make his first attempt to interact with the world by bringing up his interface. The first thing he noticed was the time. No wonder I feel rested. Discounting the interruption from his little pharmaceutical friend, Alden had slept for 15 hours. His internal clock was hopelessly off now. It felt like morning, but it was just after 11:30 p.m. on Saturday night. There were a ton of notifications. One of them said communications were back up and running for all avowed. System, place a voice call to Aunt Connie. He was sure she'd want to hear from him even if the hour was late, and he wanted to know what had happened with her, since she was one of the two people with whom he'd chosen to share his early priority for Apocalypse salvation. Calls to and from Matadero are limited to authorized individuals. Alden read the words. Oh. Well, that kind of makes sense. There was nothing of interest, in his opinion, for him to tell people about the facility. But the policy for avowed working on Matadero had always been secrecy and silence. Can you at least notify her that I'm alive and not allowed to call her yet? After getting a confirmation that that was possible, he considered his situation. I'm literally in the cube right now. I'm not supposed to be here. B ranks couldn't even join the battle groups that fought here. And almost exactly 24 hours ago, Alden had been nervous about seeing the place from a distance, from a boat, with friends. Upon his arrival, he'd been so relieved to be alive and in the company of competent adults that he hadn't let the location weigh on him. Now that he'd slept an entire day of his life away in this place and had serious thoughts about establishing this room as his personal hermit hideaway, it seemed kind of silly to be scared of it. He was here. Chaos wasn't. So. It was just a big-ass building. With comfy beds. And surprisingly inattentive medical personnel, considering how long he'd been left to his own devices. Unless they'd come to check on him while he slept, and he hadn't even noticed. It suited him fine. Even the clothes were all right. The stuff he'd come in with had been confiscated and probably declared a biohazard since it had been steeped in blood and city soup. In exchange, they'd given him drawstring patient pants with short wide legs that went easily over the boot and a gown that tied at the side. The dirty sandals he'd stuffed in his bag earlier were still with him, but he'd rather just walk around on the hospital sock they'd given him for his uninjured foot. No complaints from me if socks with grippy bottoms are the most exciting thing they've got going on here at Matadero. As he swiped the no calling out notice away, a new thought occurred to him. They are not going to make me get a tattoo before I leave, are they? Hoyu had said both of his parents had secrecy contracts about the facility and what happened during the fights, but they actually did work while they were here. Alden should be exempt. He was only visiting. Visiting a massive hospital you didn't know existed. Man. Tiny Snake, they are absolutely going to tattoo me before I leave. They might do you, too. The ink is going to clash with your scales. If the existence of the hospital wasn't a tat-worthy secret, then things like the layout of the building probably were. Alden couldn't pinpoint their precise location in the cube, since he hadn't been paying that much attention to the hallways as they transported him from the helipad here. But he could definitely narrow it down to a quadrant. He didn't know where Atonan secrecy ended and human secrecy began when it came to this place. But no involved party was going to be less paranoid about keeping it all hush-hush in the wake of an attack. At least there should be some other people around to get inked with me, right? They had mentioned other patients possibly coming in. The helicopter pilot Alaya had donated to the Knights had said she was going back for more. Guess I'll find out how many neighbors I have when I finally open the door. He stared at it. His stomach gurgled. It is weird that nobody's fed me. Healing treatments generally meant you needed more meals, not less. Is there a cafeteria here or something? He asked his ovoid potion dealer. Do you have food in you, too? The window wall answered him instead of the drone. It brightened, and a map of the nearby area appeared, with arrows directing him toward a butcher's canteen. Which was proof humans had had a hand in naming things around here in Alden's opinion. There was even a room service option. That's surprising. He would have assumed the Matadero fighters had something more like a community kitchen. Room service implied a dedicated cook, didn't it? He toyed with the idea of selecting the feature, but on the off chance that room service wasn't just another drone bringing you stuff, he didn't want to inconvenience an actual person who was probably engaged in more important business than carrying a meal to a teenager with 2 usable feet. Or 1 usable foot and a usable magic cast. Same thing. They've got to be busy with something or they'd be in here dealing with me. The last thing he had to consider before braving an exit was his Oriot. It was currently clinging to a private and uninjured part of his body that nobody should want to examine, stick a bandage on, or inject a potion into. Not his favorite place to wear it, and the tendency it had to move when he was feeling nervous or wanting to cast spells would be more awkward than comforting in this location. But it was comfortable, hidden, and still easily accessible if he really wanted to access it. The other option he'd come up with was swallowing it. He hoped he never needed to go that far. Finally, he stepped out into the hall and looked around. It was long, white, brightly lit, and empty. The faint surprise Alden felt at the sight of the pristine floor and lines of closed doors identical to his own made him realize he really had been expecting something else. Shouting nurses, screaming patients, something awful. Obviously, this is better. No chaos clawing at him, no ocean trying to drown him. Matadero at midnight was a peaceful place. Feels wrong, like it can't possibly be real, but here we are. He decided he would go find the healer, or whoever else might be awake and know things, and ask about Zoraide. She would be fine. She had to be. He might have just lost targeting on her because he was drugged. Or because she was having serious magic used on her. He didn't want to try retargeting now, because what if it messed up whatever the healer was doing somehow? It didn't seem likely, but it also didn't seem necessary to try it. And after Alden learned for sure that she was fine, he'd offer to help the hospital staff. Maybe they needed a person pickler. Or an organ pickler. It would be a way to help that wasn't too difficult. He could just sit somewhere comfortable with something in his lap, watching television or reading a book. While the elevator carried him down a floor to what he was thinking of as the central hub of the hospital complex, he wondered if it would be all right to eat something while he held a wounded person in a hospital setting. It might be unprofessional. Even if it wouldn't hurt the patient, other people might be weird about it. Like, why are you eating a mushroom burger over the body of my dying husband? They should give me a privacy curtain or something. If not, I'll just have to explain. Ma'am or sir, your choices are me saving your loved one with a mushroom burger or me taking a dinner break and not saving them at all. Then the elevator doors opened, and Alden came face to face not with anyone in need of help but with even more emptiness. He walked around for several minutes, sure people had to be somewhere. The occasional squeak of his own squish boot against the floor was the only sound. There were a few, very few, signs that other patients might have been here. In the room with the showers that delivered potion sprays, one of the doors was cracked open on a stall he hadn't used himself. And there was a yellow medical card in the room where they'd given him his boot and bandaged his scratches and scrapes. It hadn't been there when he'd left. I guess there were only 3 staff members here. They could have brought in more doctors, but it's obvious they didn't. Alden adjusted his expectations some more. Zoraide was in critical condition, an alien, and the relative of a friend of a knight. Sending her to a packed Anisidran ER that was equipped primarily for humans wouldn't have been great for anyone. That didn't mean Demon Cube Hospital was open for business or would be opening for business. It meant it was open for select cases. Maybe a red halo or 2? Artonans. Me. Did other people even get rooms? Did they all go back to the island? Have I just been left alone on Matadero? He had slept for a long time, but surely that wasn't a thing that could actually happen to a person? He headed down a floor and found a section of the facility that looked a little more like a traditional house of healing. This place really is stocked, he thought as he poked his head into a storage room. So many supplies were waiting here, completely untouched. Boxes covered in logograms and sealed with wax. Stacks of blankets. Vials of essential elements from the true planets and Earth. There were even restraints intended for people who weren't humanoid in shape. This is all reserved for something really bad. Like hundreds of avowed wizards living here and getting hurt here for an extended period of time. With nobody allowed on or off. Or with the rest of Earth in such bad shape it couldn't supply the place. He hoped they let him pick where his new tattoo went. If it was small enough, the bottom of a toe would be a great forgettable location. Eventually, the smell of herbs burning and a resonant sound in the air, as if a gong had been struck a while ago and the remnants of its ring were lingering, led him to the healer in Zeride. The Artonan man was fully engaged in doing a thing. And that thing involved painting himself and his patient both in what looked like blood while he sang a song over her body in a room full of potted plants. Yep, I was ridiculous to think Kibby wouldn't be stoked about me tasting her blood. I should have let her paint some more logograms on the cabinets. Done a little dance. My lack of showmanship had to be a real disappointment to her. Alden only watched them for a second. He didn't know how hard healing spells were, but he knew that if someone interrupted him mid-cast he might fail to properly direct his authority. He assumed the same thing applied to some extent to fully trained wizards. So he left them there. He went down another floor, still hoping to find at least one of the two avowed he'd met last night. Instead, he found the morgue. It wasn't like Alden would have walked through a door labeled morgue and helped himself to a peek. But as soon as the elevator dinged, there the bodies were, in a place that had clearly been meant to treat the living just like the floors above. They were laid out on gurneys, tabletops, and the floor. Most of them were covered with cloths that glimmered with magic. The dead woman on the table beside the nurse's station was stripped and surrounded by a trio of wizards. "You see what I mean, don't you?" one of them was saying, her voice irritated. "You're giving them all the same nose. She looks right to me. If you can't do it, put away your casting tools and call me over. Before this happens. Or I will tell your affirming greater than school that damn Trindle gave all the avowed dead his own nose. And I will smoke forever root greater than while they ablat greater than your diploma." Alden started hastily pressing random elevator buttons. Right as the doors were closing, the woman who had been delivering the admonishment turned around. Her brows lifted as she spotted him. "A human?" she said. "I thought the organizer greater than said not to worry about any." Her words were cut off. Alden leaned against the wall and let out a breath. How many bodies was that? More than 10. Less than 20. Are the hallways and rooms down there full? Is that why they're working on them out in the open like that? How many people must be dead? The morticians, if that was what they were, had obviously been as surprised to see him as he was to see them. So that confirmed what he had already ascertained for himself. Not a lot of humans in the hospital. Not living ones anyway. That could have been me. Laid out there naked on a table, having his body made presentable for family. It would have given Connie and his friends some closure this time at least. I need to get out of here. Line of asterisks. The problem with trying to get some distance from the corpses was that Alden only knew of 2 places on Matadero. And one of them was the hospital with the corpses in it. The other was the canteen. Following his memory of the map, he left the hospital by means of a corridor that came to a narrow point just wide enough for a single person to pass before it broadened into a less claustrophobic hall that connected to the bottom level of Matadero's residential section. The place looked like a hotel lobby, if the hotel had given its design budget to someone who thought gray was a bold color. He paused on his way through to watch a video montage that had been left playing on the screen in one of the seating areas. From the looks of it, everyone in the battle group that was currently supposed to be in residence here was engaged in an ongoing prank war involving a 100-kilo sack of rice. Alden watched as a vocal brute named Ramona Sahu distracted someone he vaguely recognized as an up-and-coming hero from Miami with a voice throw before she smashed him from behind with the rice bag. There were about a dozen famous and semi-famous people laughing their asses off in the background while the victim groaned and started to clean up all the spilled grains. As the montage switched over to a scene with Ramona walking through a booby-trapped doorway and catching rice in the face, Alden shook his head. The most powerful adults in the world are big dorks. He wondered if they'd all left to help the island. It made sense that if it was okay for the knights to go help out now, then it would be fine for the others to go, too. He reached another elevator and took it down. When he stepped off, he found himself in a cafeteria that looked like it had been designed by the same person responsible for the lobby above. There was a kitchen, partially visible through a cutout wall, at the other end of the room. Before Alden had made it 3 steps, a man wearing an apron over a t-shirt and boxers ran out to greet him. "Hey, I'm not the only one whose crisis wardrobe needs some work." The guy had on bedroom slippers. "English?" he asked. And before Alden could confirm, he was being peppered with questions. "Are more people coming? How many? Do they want supper? Breakfast? Something else? Is it mostly Artomans or other humans with you? Is the island still there? Is everyone alright? Where? I'm 16, and I've been asleep for the past 15 hours. That seemed like the most succinct way to convey his cluelessness. "I'm Alden. I'm a patient in the hospital section." "There's a hospital here?" Alden nodded. "Am I supposed to be feeding patients?" "There are only 2 patients that I know of for sure," said Alden. "One of them is me, and the other is being healed. So just me." He was glad he hadn't tried to order room service. This person would have been pretty confused to get a meal request from a hospital he hadn't even known was right next door. The man sighed. "I'm Kabir. Luke's chef." Kabir looked surprised. "Sorry. I know you don't work for Luke. But Luke's mentioned you. I'm his roommate." "Is he?" "Don't know," Alden said. "I'm sure he's fine. He was on campus when everything went wrong. It had to be one of the best places to be. I've been here since everything went wrong. Cooking. Galacors, Melanie Carrison, brought me in. I haven't even left the cafeteria. Nobody's come. Nobody. I was starting to think I was the only person here. On Matadero." He laughed a little nervously. "That would be crazy. But here you are. Human. Hospital patient. Luke's friend. I'll feed you." In the kitchen, food covered every inch of the place. Paella, pastries, prepackaged pudding cups. Alden opened a huge fridge just to see how far the madness went and found 100 individually wrapped sandwiches stacked wall to wall on one of the shelves. Kabir, a victim of circumstance, was the only person responsible for all of it. He hadn't slept much at all in the past 2 days. "And so she asks me to make something with the special Artono 3 potatoes. They are not easy to use, but I said, of course, Ms. Vora. I can cook with these. Just in case the generals agree to take a break and dine on Libra. It has never happened before, even though she's asked many times over the years, but I don't point this out. I just cook pink potato dumplings with clam sauce. Strange recipe. I don't like it. No one comes for dinner. So I put it away and prep ingredients for chicken a la king before I go to my cabin." He frowned down at the skillet on the stove in front of him. "I think this needs fat, something creamy. Vegan. Almond butter will be nice for you." Alden watched curiously as the chef spooned a giant gob of almond butter into the skillet where his meal was happening. Fresh greens, mushrooms, and a lot of roasted garlic were in there already, gradually becoming a sauce thanks to starchy pasta water. 10 minutes after I fall asleep, the disaster starts. The next thing I know, I'm flying in Galacos's arms. He started scooping linguine into the pan with a set of tongs. Everyone else leaves to go help Zedora and find family members, but Ms. Vora suddenly says, "Oh, Kabir. You'll stay here and cook for the wizards, won't you? Won't you?" Mushrooms and noodles flew through the air and he caught them again in the pan. On the 6th tray of cheese muffins, I decide maybe there are no wizards. No avowed. Just me. I put up a view spell at the elevator to watch for demons. But he kept cooking, thought Alden. There's no chaos here right now, so I don't think you have to worry about those. I'm a C rank, you know. I'm not supposed to be here. He glowered at Alden's food as he tipped it onto a plate. I bet they make me get a tattoo. "Oh, I'm thinking of getting mine on the toe." He took the offering. "Thanks. I would have been fine with just the soup and the salad, but this looks good." Alden ate his meal at one of the cafeteria tables with Kabir looking on and bouncing a leg nervously the whole while. "I've only seen 4 wizards since I left my room," Alden told him between scarfing down bites. "So you might want to take a break from cooking. The place seems pretty abandoned. And it's after midnight. I know that the time kind of doesn't matter under the circumstances. But you should sleep." He started slurping on his bowl of miso soup. "I think the idea was that our Tonans would be coming here?" Kabir said. That was what it sounded like Miss V'lra thought, but she was giving me instructions while she was bestowing word chains on everyone. She was working so hard, she was sweating. It was very confusing. "We could ask the morticians, I guess," said Alden. The chef nodded. Then he looked up, eyes going round her. "The what?" Line of asterisks. Kabir was reluctant to leave the area he'd been assigned to. "It's Matadero. We can't just explore," he protested when Alden suggested they might as well go to the hospital together and find him a bedroom. "And some pants." "But I've already been that way," Alden explained. "There's really nothing you're going to get in trouble for seeing as far as I can tell." The man shook his head. "I'm just going to stay here. I'll make coffee cake. It goes with Wevy, doesn't it?" So Alden ended up alone once more, carrying a box of food he hoped Zoraide might get to eat. When he found the healer still in full mystical mode, he debated his options and chose to fetch his messenger bag from his room before coming back down. He positioned a chair at the end of the hall in a spot where he wouldn't interrupt the healing process but also where he couldn't possibly miss the Artonan's emergence. He had decided not to go offer the morticians supper. He really didn't want to find out all the details about their work or accidentally present himself as a volunteer to help them with it. He'd had enough of bodies for one weekend. "How many are down there? Are more still coming?" He shoved the questions away as well as he could. Right now, Alden had no instructions to follow and no knowledge of what he should be doing other than keeping himself and a snake alive. He was in a hospital, technically waiting for further treatment. He suspected he'd fallen into some kind of cross-species organizational blind spot. The Artonan had insisted Alden was his patient, so if the human doctor and healer were still around, they hadn't put him on their to-do list. "So he's my guy." His left hand was worrying him more than the other injuries. Not because it was worse, per se, but because he wanted it healed better than everything else. All I can do is ask him about it. And until then, he guessed it was all right to do what he wanted. And what he wanted, he realized after just a minute's consideration, was to do his homework. An essay on whether or not humans should accommodate unpleasant social customs when encountering other peoples, for Intro to Other Worlds. Recording himself trying some difficult pronunciations for his conversation class. Analyzing the footage from his team's obstacle course wins. He wanted to do it calmly, with attention to detail. The way you did homework when nothing was wrong in your life except for having a long, lonely stretch of time on your hands. So he did. Just like it was a dull Saturday night. Like classes would start back on Monday. Like homework mattered. Chapter 146. You seem to be devoted to your task. Alden's stylus paused against the surface of the tablet, right in the middle of writing the phrase "Utwi acquisitive customs." He'd been uninterrupted for hours. When he looked up, he saw a man in a familiar uniform standing just a meter away, regarding him with a tilted head. "H'Ntion Eshurti." Alden spoke a little blankly. He hadn't been expecting anyone to find him here except for the healer, and he pictured the knights miles away, stopping mountains of water from collapsing, waiting among the ruins, and hauling bodies from the depths. Seeing Eshurti made him realize how out of it he'd been when he was rescued. The Artonan man had, for some reason, loomed very physically large in his memory. But standing here now, his height was barely above average for his species. He wore a dull red coat with the broad sleeves cut at the elbow. It was highly decorated, tiny metal studs instead of embroidery, of course. The high-necked undershirt and harem pants were matching shades of golden brown. and he had a belt hung with pouches, wand loops, and a large hoop that held all the rings that wouldn't fit comfortably on his fingers. A fully kitted out wizard. Only he is not just a wizard. The knight's sudden appearance dredged up an unfamiliar blend of gratitude, respect, and apprehension. It also made Alden realize this was the first time he was properly meeting one of them in the flesh since he had time to process what they were. His little tour through the art '" household had been in the wake of a near-death experience in his affixation. He had mostly been thinking about getting home. Since then, he had only interacted with Violart '" for a minute or two at a time before she passed off her tablet. And then yesterday he'd been half dead once more and fixated on Zoraida and '". Now that danger was less imminent, complicated feelings were beginning to make themselves known. About the night. About the fact that he'd saved Alden. About the information he might be bringing and the questions he might ask. What does he want? Escherty had hair so dark it was hard to say for sure if it was black or purple, so close it might as well be, and his hands were clasped in front of him while he took his time examining Alden, too. "You don't have to use the title," he said. "It makes me sound so serious. I would wager an Elkantian orchard greater than that the clamor greater than coming from the direction as Portillo feeling the '" gear, woman." Alden nodded. He started making that loud noise about 2 Earth hours ago. He wanted to call it a hooting noise, but he had no idea how to describe all sounds in Artonin. The knight looked down the hall for a while. "It's good he has so much stamina," he said finally. "Healers who insist on being traditional to a tedious degree greater than need it. You should have heard him when we arrived. Linda and I had barely taken the light of your world into our eyes for the first time, and there he was complaining. Where is my grove? How long since we found this planet? Were we too lazy to grow a healing grove?" Alden smiled uncertainly. "He covered me in fish scales when I got here and sang to them." That healing spell had interacted with him on an existential level, which had made him pretty nervous about the healer noticing him noticing. But he hadn't. A cast spell touching you wasn't the same as an authority-to-authority pet, it seemed. Alden had still been very careful not to make so much as a single peep with his own authority. "Was that a new experience for you?" asked Escherty. "It was." "How fun." He looked down the hall again as the hooting hit a fever pitch. "Has he told you anything about Zoraida and ''s condition?" "No. I'm not sure where the about who were here went either. When I woke up, I looked for them, but I received a message about that. They stayed for a time in case of more special cases greater than, but they were eager to go back to their usual house to assist their colleagues greater than there. It was allowed. We have plenty of other options if they're needed." One of his eyes landed on Alden's foot. "They did finish repairing you before they left, didn't they?" "They helped me, but Portillo told them I was his patient. I think we all understood that I don't know how to say possessive in a polite way. Grab greedy like a toddler greater than. But you are well." Alden really doubted that was a common polite way of saying possessive, but he liked it. "I'm fine. Much better than the last time you saw me." He helped a lot, but he said he still wanted to do a few things. "Portillo is competent. He won't actually forget you even if he's busy with something that seems to be more difficult than we hoped." His face turned toward the hooting again. "It sounds as if he's in the middle of it." Alden gestured toward the meal box in his lap. "I've been keeping this food the right temperature for them. I didn't know what else to do." "What kind of food?" Escherty asked, looking back at him. Alden could tell by the gleam in the knight's eyes that the food was about to become endeared as long as it didn't sound completely foul. "There's some yogurt. A bowl of rice. Sandwiches. Do you want? Come with me. There are places much more appetizing greater than this one." He'll call me when he's completed his current ritual. If he doesn't exsanguinate greater than himself. Line of asterisks. Escherty took Alden to a living room that had clearly been designed for Artonin comfort. The temperature was closer to hot than warm, Wood featured heavily in the decor, and a wavy press stood inside its own special cabinet. There were adjoining rooms with closed doors. He was guessing this was Escherty's personal suite or one he shared with Lindauta. The place looked lived in, which made sense if they'd been here for weeks. And unless there was some other explanation for the corner dedicated to random objects, then they'd been enjoying the equivalent of mail-order shopping through the embassy. Among other things, they had a pair of matching cuckoo clocks, a chrysalis in a display case, and the widest variety of sugar sprinkles he had ever seen. Alden wasn't in the right mood to be amused by the fact that at least one Artonan considered sprinkles to be worthy of the interesting Earth items corner, but he did make note of it. "We will converse here," Escherty said, leading him over to a pair of low, cushioned chairs by the first real window Alden had seen on Matadero. It was too dark outside for there to be much of a view. He swallowed. He couldn't imagine what the two of them would be conversing about. A few minutes ago, he would have assumed the Knights were much too busy to talk to him about anything. It couldn't be a purely social chat. On the way here, he'd thought of so many different kinds of terrible news Escherty could deliver. The man in the flyer survived, and he's accusing you of murdering his friends. You know we can't just let a human wizard run around living among the other humans and causing mass confusion, don't you? Pack your bags. Attacks on other locations happened while you slept. Tens of thousands are dead. And Zedora is gone. We are furious with your species and have decided every avowed on Earth has to spend half the year slaying demons from now on. You look nervous. Escherty had kicked off his shoes and tossed aside his belt as they entered. He sat down in one of the chairs and leaned forward to reach for the box in Alden's arms. Alden handed it over before taking his own seat. "No. I'm well. It's been a strange day. Night. That's all. Strange. Unhappy." Escherty was sniffing each of the sandwiches in the box and reading the labels on the wrappers curiously. "I do feel lucky that I pulled you from the water with the radiant single quotage. I will make a big deal out of a small matter for humorous purposes greater than about it the next time I meet the quaternary." Could that not just have been translated as joke around? Alden wondered. I'll say she obviously allowed a curse greater than to latch onto greater than your back when she teleported you with that older method. He chuckled delightedly and wriggled his fingers over the sandwiches once more before grabbing a BLT. Were curses real? Or was the idea of them being real what made teasing Alisart's single quotage about them funny? Probably the second. Escherty didn't seem like the kind of person who would laugh at actual misfortune. Alden tried to sort himself out and think of how it was he was supposed to behave when he was watching a knight who'd just saved his life, and whom Stuart had spoken highly of, dip a sandwich into a cup of Greek yogurt. After returning from what Alden could only hope was unflooding a city. That's right. Stuart. I forgot. Tyon Escherty, you're using the title again? I wanted to congratulate you both on your Zvulgivness, Alden said, glad that the word was at least one he could pronounce. He wasn't clear on what relationship it celebrated, but Stuart had said that he was supposed to deliver the congratulations to both involved parties even if he was only talking to one of them. A surprised look crossed the Artonan's face. He'd shoved nearly a quarter of a sandwich into his mouth while Alden was speaking, and his jaws worked while he lifted one eye from his contemplation of the food box, so that both were pointed at Alden. Did I say it wrong after all? Escherty finished chewing. Thank you. I'm not sure if my usual response is appropriate for. Well, I see no reason not to. I hope you also find someone worthy of breaking greater than yourself with one day. Alden blinked. That word that was being translated as breaking wasn't any of the ones he knew that meant something similar, and the use of that version of yourself indicated they were talking about something that affected everything Escherty was. I have no clue. But I totally knew it was going to be intensity level 99.9. Does the uniform obliterate their ability to operate at a lower level? I bet it does. Happy Night Honeymoon equals some kind of tandem breakage of their very beings. He hoped that Earth's translation of breaking was just as incomplete as its translation of honeymoon had been. Or that Escherty was being poetic. Stuart had seemed really happy for them, which would imply that nothing scary was going on if Stuart was a normal person. But he was Stuart. They've been growing a sprinkle collection and buying matching clocks, dummy. They clearly like each other, and it's obviously not an unpleasant event. I'm curious, said Asherty. How did you know? Stuart H told me, Alden said. Asherty's brows lifted and he hummed a high note. So Zeride and H wasn't just naming random members of that family. I wondered if it was a product of her injuries. Now I'm even more curious. Stuart H is my. Zeride had been startled by the word friend. We are friends, though, aren't we? Stuart hadn't technically given Alden permission to call him Stu, but that didn't feel like a big deal considering the fact that he'd named a pet after Alden, invited him over to his house, and given him a perfect learning cushion. We're becoming friends. Are you? Asherty sounded intrigued. With the primary's youngest? How are you managing that? Alden didn't know exactly how he meant the question. We met at Leafsong. I was summoned to help with a problem some of the students were having. And now we talk on the weekends. Viewlart helps. Oh. View. Yes. She does have a reputation as a disregarder greater than of rules, conventions, and solid objects. He pulled a piece of bacon off of the sandwich and peered at it. Aren't you interesting? Alden didn't answer because he wasn't sure if the knight was talking to him or the cured meat. Linda and I were pleased to relax here because your planet has, until now, been charmingly greater than uneventful. Alden's worries, just beginning to fade thanks to the conversation having been lighter than he feared, were suddenly front and center again. How is everything out there? Is he avoiding mentioning it on purpose? He couldn't feel any chaos, but he still found it all too easy to let the reasonable image of flooded streets and his thoughts turn into something that made no sense. Grass stretching into the distance, rotting away. He made himself refocus on the night. I'm sorry I needed saving, he said. There was a flyer for me at the ambassador's. Zeride wanted me to get on it immediately. But she also didn't think Earth was really in global danger. So it seemed safe enough to wait a little while for her, so that we could get off Anzidora together. It had gone so wrong so quickly. And for such an incomprehensible reason. I didn't want to leave her alone, he said. But she might not have been so badly hurt if I'd done what she told me to at first. They might have attacked her still, but instead of fighting, she might have run. Initially, had she fought the vow to protect herself? Or to protect the flyer for Alden? He had no way of knowing since he hadn't been in the greenhouse when it happened. Asherty was putting his bacon back onto his sandwich. This is what I wanted to talk to you about. But first, don't apologize for trying to take the correct course. Bad outcomes greater than often make good efforts and good intentions look like foolishness greater than. It doesn't mean that making a good effort with a good intention was a mistake. How else should one act? He pulled up his feet and sat cross-legged in the chair. And I hope you know you aren't obligated to follow an instruction just because an Artonan delivers it. I know that. Of course. Then accept with grace greater than mine need to reiterate the point. Greater than. Alden felt his eyebrows lifting, and with effort, he pulled them back down so that he wouldn't be making funny faces at the important person. I have eavesdropped on too many wizards with unbecoming greater than opinions today. And I did notice Zeride H's attempt to compel you greater than toward a behavior she desired by invoking greater than the art family. But that didn't bother me, Alden said quickly. I think she just had the wrong idea about how much they liked me. I'd already ignored the same argument when she tried to use it earlier. I'm glad you didn't feel her urging greater than as pressure. And I don't know what the rest of your conversation with her might have been like. But the escape flyer was an offer. Not an official order. You were allowed to refuse it. Asherty took the last bite of his sandwich and set the yogurt cup aside on an intricately tiled side table. Then he said, I wanted to hold a short light-hearted party greater than to meet you and the other avowed of Earth who have impressive commendations. He did. Alarm bells were ringing in Alden's head. What kind of guest list would that be? Linda said I ought to wait until we were finished with any demons. And now look what's happened. Instead of my short light-hearted party greater than I must question you about the deaths of 3 avowed. They might not all be, they're all dead. I asked the contract moments after you told me how Zaridiant H was hurt. And Bashner received word about the one in the flyer. The rumors are already spreading like Wevy Blight greater than. There are already rumors? Alden said, so I guessed that he spoke in English. Among my people, Escherty said. I doubt humans have heard anything unless someone has completely forgotten their proper discretion greater than. Would you mind telling me exactly what happened? So this really is going to be something I have to deal with? Of course it is, he answered himself. There are 3 dead people. What were you expecting? He hadn't been unaware that 3 bodies was an investigation-worthy situation. He had even included it in his frantic guesswork about what Escherty might want from him. But everything else felt bigger. The deaths of those 3 had happened so quickly, and all of Alden's other fears seemed more pressing or personal. His roommates. The Longs. The Nilima neighborhood where Lexi and Khan's little sister lived, covered in her probably temporary turtle tattoos. Alden had a driver's license that belonged to a dead man from Iowa. Did he have to get word to that man's family? Had someone else already done it? And the people who'd caused all of this, had they been found? Was the system really all right? Would it keep being all right? For years. Until he was old? Would Earth? What's left of the life I had on Friday? Some of it. None of it. But Escherty wanted to know about Zaridia and the dead men. Alden wished he could take a couple of minutes to step out of the room and cast peace of mind, even though he was already dreading the payback for the last 2. He settled for taking a deep breath and forcing the litany of questions as far to the back of his thoughts as he could. A lot of people in the neighborhood were familiar with the ambassador's house, he began. From his parties and times when he'd shown off the protections on it. They kept coming by to ask if they could stay there. Some of them thought it would be safer from the water and from chaos than the building the system had told them to evacuate to. Because it was Ertonen. Zaridia wanted to make sure her neighbors are left safely. We should have been able to do that and then leave in the flyer together. Telling it took a surprisingly long time. Far longer than the deaths themselves had. Escherty wore a mildly curious and unconcerned expression that was so steady Alden eventually arrived at the conclusion that it was deliberate. He couldn't have imagined anyone choosing that tactic for questioning another person about the grisly details of a killing until just now. Worried sympathy seemed like a more obvious emotion to fake if you were going to put on a show. Alden liked this better. Escherty's face said he was listening to something worthwhile but innocuous. It was the face of someone hearing about your summer job or the perfectly straight line of pigeons you'd spotted on your way home from school. I bent down to pick her up, and he tried to stab me with a stake. Where did he hit you? My back. Between my shoulders. My skill stopped it. I'm glad about that. What happened next? He was unwrapping another sandwich. That face of his was also dangerous because it made telling him terrible things so easy. Alden was starting to feel almost like he could reveal anything to the man without it being a big deal. It was only ingrained personal rules that kept him from accidentally saying, by the way, I didn't just run at those 2. I blasted one of them with my RE out first. You give the elementary schoolers pretty punchy spells, don't you? Do you know why they thought they could successfully steal such a valuable flyer? Escherty asked. Oh. I didn't mention that part. I overheard them say they hit something called a swallow box, and they were going to rob a healer. But they'd changed their minds. And something about usually stealing whatever Artonans left in their offices overnight? Escherty was plucking a blue cheese crumble off of the new sandwich and tasting it cautiously. I ask you this because you are a human and will have natural insight greater than into other humans. If you had taken items of small worth from wizards' desks without consequence greater than many times before, would you think that a much larger theft would also be ignored? I wouldn't have taken the small things in the first place. No? Alden started to shake his head, then he realized. I have a ring that Warley Roden loaned me. I like to pretend I'm not going to give it back to him when I eventually meet him again, but I'm sure I will. Humans generally agree that stealing is wrong. If Roden is shameless greater than enough to ask you for it, you should tell him you left it with Alisart single quote H. For safekeeping greater than. I'm sorry for interrupting. Please continue. Alden did. Escherty only stopped him a few more times to ask questions before he reached the end. Zoraide was hurt so badly. Alden looked down at his hands. They weren't exactly clean. There were scratches. The bandage. But he was remembering what they'd looked like, what it had felt like, when they were covered in her blood. They'd hit her on the head. She was confused. I was trying to convince her to let me carry her, but she kept telling me they were only asleep. So that I wouldn't be afraid. She kept giving me loving lies. For a while, there was only the sound of Escherty chewing. Through the window, the sky was getting brighter. The dark blue waves looked like they went on forever. Have you finished telling me about the incident? Escherty asked. Alden nodded. Truthfully and without leaving anything out. Their eyes met. I told you the truth. But you've left something out. Alden's heart beat faster. He wondered if Escherty could hear it. I haven't left anything out about what those men said and did. Or how Zoraide killed them. I only left out something personal. The Artonan's casual facade hadn't cracked. He still had his feet up in his chair. If you'd told me about it, would it change my understanding of the event? I don't think so. No. All right, Escherty said. I believe you. Thank you very much for your testimony greater than. Alden was relieved. And also a little surprised by the word testimony. That seemed more formal than he'd realized. Was this a legal conversation of some kind? Not quite. I wanted to hear your words so that I could head off greater than any rumors Bashnor might start himself. Zoraide and single quote H offends him. He would not mind her being removed from her assignment here, at least until his own assignment ends. He could create havoc greater than for her. Even though she didn't do anything wrong? The issue is her class status. She has chosen to stride along a narrow branch. Legally, she did nothing wrong. But people will make moral accusations greater than against her if the situation is handled badly. What is her class status? Alden asked. Escherty sighed. She has been trying, since just before she reached adulthood, to become a member of the ordinary class. People do that? It's not unheard of for those raised toward the wizard class to make the attempt in their youth. But almost none of them succeed. Zoraide and single quote H desperately wants to. Her reasons are not ones I agree with at all. But she should still be allowed to live as she has chosen. Without Bashnor impeding greater than her like a spiteful greater than child. So if she'd cast spells, she would have failed at being a member of the ordinary class? It would have been a setback greater than for her. There would also have been questions about which spells she'd used and if her use of them was correct. He dropped what was left of his sandwich on the table and brushed his hands off. Thanks to your words, I will feel confident telling everyone loudly and frequently that her behavior was appropriate and courageous. It will discourage others from maligning her character greater than, and I'm sure her family would be glad not to worry over her. May I ask you another question? Alden nodded. Why did you try so hard to save her? I didn't save her, said Alden. I just ran around with her for a while. You and Lindada saved both of us. There is a level of humility that insults the intelligence of the one who compliments you. I'm sorry. Escherty waited. He really wants an answer, I guess. Alden didn't know how to give a quick and clean one to that question. At first, I thought she might be an assistant who had been left behind by uncaring wizards. I've seen some people die like that. And she was so kind. So genuinely worried for people. She knew the names of all her neighbors. She killed for me. I bet when she is healed, she'll be sorry she had to kill those avowed. She seems like a person who'll suffer because of it. That seems likely, Escherty agreed. based on what I know of her. Alden looked out at the water. I don't think it will ever bother me that those men are dead. It's never bothered me that the person who killed my parents is gone. But Zoraide kept telling me not to be afraid. She kept giving me the loving lie. To protect me. If Escherty wanted truths, then they were buried somewhere in here. And she reminds me of other people who cared. Good people. Who got hurt. Or got taken away. I wasn't afraid of seeing those bodies she was trying to protect me from, but I was afraid of seeing hers. I understand, said Escherty. I would like, is most of Isidora still there? Alden asked, not looking away from the window. Some of it must be. Right? Yes, but, that's good. I knew a lot of it was probably fine. That was what made sense. But I still felt as if. How many died? Some of the people I know were in shelters. Were those all safe? And what about the contract? Is it hurt? Or permanently weakened? On Thagun there were signs before it failed. Does the same kind of thing happen here on Earth, or is it different? A hand landed lightly on his shoulder, and he froze, the stream of questions ending in an instant. I'm sorry, he said. Escherty stood by the arm of his chair, looking down at him. I didn't mean to babble. You should have babbled sooner. The knight didn't remove his hand from Alden's shoulder. You were frightened. Of more than seeing the body of Zoraide and single quote H. I'm all right. I have been cruelly thoughtless greater than. Alden, most of Isidora doesn't look anything like the place we rescued you from. And Earth's contract is nothing like Munthagun's was. A planet such as this one doesn't fail so easily. It wouldn't even send a text message, said Alden. That shouldn't be taken as a show of its weakness, only of its management style and plotting greater than upon encountering a new challenge. It will be some time before your contract's decision-making is completely analyzed greater than. But it remains strong. Escherty gave him a pained smile. I'm an expert on weak points. Cracks. A lifelong student of the way things fracture greater than. And I am sorry for you. You have had the bad luck of standing at the center of too many cracks for a person so young. Alden stared at him. Most of Isidora survives unscathed greater than, the knight said calmly. Very few people have died, considering the unpredictable nature of the magic driving the disaster. Because your contract is healthy. You said. There were fragilities that worried you greatly, Alden said. When you pulled me from the water. There are. And they do. Escherty's eyes turned toward the window. But it is our burden and our honor to worry about those. Not yours. And I do not doubt our ability to repair those cracks in time. His voice fell to a murmur. I only regret the cost. Alden followed his gaze. Outside, the sun was coming up. Chapter 147. Now this is what we're talking about. This is what we mean when we say avowed are not us, they're tools for controlling us. The voice of the talk show host flowed from the radio of a restored 1959 Ford Fairlane as it cruised the dark, quiet streets of a California suburb. For our listeners who haven't heard about the situation in Uruguay, I think our listeners have heard by now, Wilbert. They are smart people. They are staying informed. You're right, Polly. You're right. But for anyone tuning in for the first time, this situation we're hearing about is a sign of things to come if we slack off on monitoring the avowed. If we let people who are not us live among us. This woman in Uruguay, she is already a member of their Chamber of Representatives. They have let her in there. And she almost certainly is avowed. People who know her have said it. This is not a rumor, folks. It's really not, Polly agreed. People have said it. And even if they hadn't said it, you only have to look at her. You can tell through these videos that people have found of her that there is some magic and some mind control. Can you imagine what it's like in person? Forgive me, Polly baby. You're the love of my life. You're a breathtaking human being. I am. 100% human. Take a look at Polly's picture on our website. That is what a gorgeous, all-natural human being looks like. But the woman in Uruguay, I mean just look at her. Just listen to her. They say that appeal doesn't have a strong effect through screens. But what else would they say? She's an avowed. At least a B rank. Definitely, Polly agreed. At least the B is a really good guesser about this kind of thing. And she says, get this, listeners. People have asked her about it, and of course she denies it. But she also says she feels sympathetic towards unregistereds and hopes her country will change the way it does things. A loud bell sound effect played. That's the warning alarm ringing. She's ringing it herself. It's coming out of her own mouth. Can you hear it? Wilbert gets frustrated, said Polly. I'm frustrated, too. How can so many of our fellow human beings not understand the risks? This woman, I shouldn't really call her that, this alien tool is already a politician. One day, she could lead a country she shouldn't even be allowed to live in. She could be speaking at the UN. If that happens, she will have an effect on our president. On the leaders of other nations. Wilbert groaned dramatically. And it's not like it was in the old days. You old-timers remember. There used to be a lot more pushback from humans against the idea that just meeting some Artonans should change how we do things on our planet. But we all live now in a world where most people, almost all of our fellow humans are feeding it what I like to think of as that poisoned alien trough. It really is poisoned. That sweet taste is poison. And they're saying you and me and Polly are crazy. That these superhumans are just talented humans. But they're not. They're not. When they were children, they were human beings with some kind of a weakness. That's the theory that makes the most sense to us. And it's very sad, but if you'll read our books, We Dream of a Lonely Earth and Chaos is a Lie, you will understand that Polly and I are gentle people. We feel sorry for boys and girls with this weakness. A mental pliability is what we think it is. That makes them easier for the Artonans to manipulate and use. They are victims. But once they become avowed, once they've become tools, I hate to say it, but we probably can't save them. They aren't one of us anymore. When you hear them saying things, you have to know it's really a wizard speaking through them. If humans were meant to have magic, it would have come to us through evolution, Polly said. Tell them about the book, baby. At this very moment, we're writing a book about raising human children, said Polly. We are writing it as fast as we can because everyone needs to read it. That's right, Polly. It's a parent's job to raise children the Artonans would be terrified to use. Strong, safe human boys and girls. We like to call them our little future listeners. Ha ha ha. That we do. Now, if you've already taken your kids to a house of healing or if you've been sending them to a school that uses magical devices to enhance the educational experience, don't panic. Our new book is going to include traditional human alternatives, advice from so many ancient human cultures. We really want to get to the heart of what human childhood is supposed to be. And we talk about ways to cleanse your family of the driver, whose fingers had been drumming against the steering wheel as he listened to the radio show, suddenly reached over and switched it off. His hands tightened on the wheel again. The vintage car accelerated. Just a few minutes later, it had to slow down to make the turn into a driveway. The headlights shone briefly on the house number. Below it, a matching plaque bore the name of the family who lived there, Moore. A bluish glow leaked through a gap in the blinds of the guest room window. The woman inside was up late, staring at the screen of a tablet, trying to think of all the right things to say to her son, Jacob. Even though his text messages had stopped coming a while ago. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. All right, who set the sound system to play that Walter and Molly trash? The middle-aged woman who was speaking set her cards on the table and leaned back to look around the room. The non-avowed-only speakeasy was just a pair of apartments in an F-City free housing block. A couple of years ago, some resourceful people had knocked out a few walls, installed soundproofing, and hung up a sign behind the bar that said Stormies. As far as such establishments went on Anzidora, it was of the lowest caliber, but it was limping along thanks to the location. It's Wilbert and Polly, said a young man wearing an technical jacket. They've said each other's beautiful human names about 20 times so far. He'd been struggling to finish the mint julep he'd ordered an hour ago, and the glass had left a ring of condensation on the laminate tabletop. The older man beside him was having no such trouble. All that was left of his fifth whiskey was a melting ice cube. He was glaring at it. "I don't really care what their names are. I come here to hang out with people who aren't casting spells every few minutes or giving me surprised looks when I have to pay for things with a secret instead of an interface," said the woman. "That doesn't mean I want to listen to a pair of foreigners tell me that all my relatives are Artonan mouthpieces and that I'm deluding my humanity by enjoying a good wrestling match at Brutal Ring. How many of out could they even have met in real life if they don't live here?" Another woman added. "And what happened to the Kenyan drum songs that were playing? I haven't heard all of this year's batch yet." The Bagrodas were really outdoing themselves. The man with the empty whiskey glass pushed himself up from the table so hard the poker chips they were using rattled. "Turn that shit off," he bellowed. "Cyril," said the woman who'd complained first. "Don't." He was already stalking across the sticky floor toward the bar. A couple of other people at the table winced to her side. "He's been in a bad mood for a year and a half," someone muttered. "It has gotten. I know his feelings are hurt, but isn't he treating his kid horribly? His own parents basically disowned him. You'd think he'd want to do it different than they, his kid. SHHHH. Who's his kid?" Then technical student asked curiously. Before anyone could answer the question, there was swearing from over by the bar, followed by the clatter of a polycarbonate beer mug bouncing across the floor. "I don't need this place. I don't need people like this," Cyril shouted. "I'm going to walk on the beach," he thundered out. In the ensuing silence, everyone looked around at each other. A few people laughed. "There are literally no beaches anywhere near here," said the student. "Should one of us—" "Let him go," said the older woman. "He needs to cool off. Cops are forgiving to drunks without powers. Reason this place is still open even if it's less than subtle." With pity perk. The student took another swig from the julep and made a face. "At least there's something. Maybe if I tell my family there are perks, they'll stop acting like I've died." The talk show cut off, and a moment later, the Kenyan drum songs started up again. And an Fajir watch was left behind on the table beside Cyril's poker chips. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. "One more, Bird. Please, just one more. It's late, and you said that 3 spells ago. Greater than. And she'll say it 10 from now. Don't keep spoiling my daughter. She's insatiable." "What did she say, Dad?" "She said you're tons of trouble. Stop forgetting to charge your phone if you want a translator." "She did not say that." "You didn't say that about me, did you, Bird?" A pretty woman with dark, waist-length hair was standing on the deck of an old yacht. She smiled at the girl who was begging for spells, then turned and let out a singing chant, her arms undulating through the air. As she sang, a brachiosaurus appeared ahead of them, working meters above the waves. It was lit as if it stood under a sunny sky, even though the night was a cloudless blanket of stars. "Super wow." The girl ran forward. "S ranks are the best. You're the best of the best, Bird. I'm glad we found you in Thailand. I didn't know adjusters could do illusions of things they haven't even seen before. You do realize we didn't discover her, don't you, Analyze?" her father said from his seat in a deck chair. Beside him, an older man lay snoring, one hand gripping a quarterstaff tipped with carved crystal on the ends. "She and Mr. Dawa are just here because of our job. We don't get to keep them. I know. We all sail for Sal." Analyze punched her arm into the air. "Hey, Bird, I'm almost 11. I could be an S rank soon. It could happen." "That's unlikely considering your mother and I aren't even A's." The girl gripped the boat's railing and leaned over it. Strands of hair, once dyed purple but faded now to a dull pink, blew around her tanned cheeks as they approached the brachiosaurus and sailed beneath it. "Magical," she breathed. "Tell her I have seen this before," greater than the adjuster said. "An educational parks megafina experience. And I have a skill that helps me recall images." Greater than. He repeated the message. "Hey, that's really cool," said Annalise. "Mom gets loads of work on the triplanets, and she has been saving up. So if I do get S, I can probably trade into Adjuster. Tell her if she does want to when the time comes, I'll help her get to a consulate for trading without being seen." Greater than said Bird. "Will you really?" "That's, tell her if anyone gives her trouble, I will hit them with my staff." Greater than Darwin muttered without moving. The father glanced from one of them to the other. After a second's hesitation, he translated their words for his daughter. Her eyes grew round, and then she started chattering at Bird even more excitedly than before. About helping each other live freely. "That's how it should be," greater than Dawa said, his voice intense despite the fact that he'd just been sleeping. "That's what this is about." Greater than. He finally opened his eyes and peered up at the sky. "These people we're going to meet, the magical machine they're bringing us, the weapons, they will all help us out for years to come. My group doesn't always get along with the ones that call our purpose Sal. But for this, we unite. One step up the mountain at a time. This is a big step." Greater than. "A big one," greater than Bird agreed. "Well, I look forward to seeing what all the fuss is about," said the father. "This is the most Sal has ever paid us for a job, and I'm curious about this item they're using to get off the island. It doesn't sound like it's worth 2S ranks coming along for something like that. But it's good to have you both around. Dad, have you gotten another message from the captain of the boat we are going to meet?" "What does he say?" Annalise asked. "He actually hasn't answered my last message. Maybe he's sleeping, like we should be." Line of asterisks. "I have put our daughter to sleep for the third time," Ethan Roberts announced as he flopped onto the bed beside his wife, Ekaterina. "Thank you," she said, her hair spilling across one pillow, her arms clutching another to her chest. "I scrubbed the last tattoo off her foot. I resisted the urge to use brute strength. Good. I made up a bedtime story about that turtle rug Lexi bought her. That was Constantine." "Really? That was nice of him. He's growing, it's hiding some dents and scratches on the floor." He groaned. "Making up bedtime stories about turtles is sexy," she said. "If Irina doesn't start calling for us again in the next 5 minutes, let's do something about how sexy you are." He smiled. "By the way, did you get us a new mattress?" Her brow furrowed. "I keep thinking it feels different, too. Maybe we just got used to the ones we used on the trip to." Sirens broke their conversation in the peacefulness of the night. One screamed from just overhead on the rooftop of their building. In an instant, the Robertses were down the hall in Irina's room, and Ekaterina was wrapping her arms around the little girl, who was covering her ears with her hands and howling her own confusion and fear back at the sudden noise. "What is this?" Ethan asked, as they stood there staring at each other over their daughter's head. Disaster messages started to roll in, only to be interrupted by a more personal one. "Emergency teleportation to a safe location is recommended for your child. Teleportation will be available shortly. The triplanetary government urges you to accept. Caretakers and comforters, bound by contract to their duty, will be on site to greet children as they arrive. When you are ready to consent to the teleportation of your child, please select yes. 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 Duh. They were both silent for a single second. I'll get some things packed for her," Ethan whispered. "In case it doesn't mind sending them with her." While he rushed around the room, stuffing a couple of beloved toys and favorite clothes into a small green backpack, his wife sat on the edge of the bed, consoling Irina with pats and whispered words, explaining what was about to happen. A few minutes later, the little girl was gone. Her mother stood on a turtle rug that covered a scarred patch of floor, her arms suddenly empty. "This is the right thing," Ethan said. "We both definitely know, and emergency teleports isn't something you say no to." "Yes. Our boys. They'll be fine. We'll find some way to call. But the CNH campus should be safer than almost any." He stopped speaking as his interface flared a bright red. Emergency orders issued. No summons incoming. You are already at the location of your assignment. Orders: persuade Avowed inside Nilama apartments to follow contract orders and evacuate. Do not use force or threats of force against other Avowed for the purpose of completing this assignment. Do not leave Nilama apartments until all Avowed are evacuated or new orders are issued. Refusal is not allowed. Payment will be. Ethan. You have a red ring of light over your head. You do, too. He was still reading the assignment. I have to persuade our neighbors to listen to the system, without using force. Most of them will do it on their own, but how am I going to make Mr. Whale leave? He hasn't left 509 cents before Lexi was born. What kind of order is? You just have to talk to the neighbors? Why? What do you have to do? I have to rip a bunch of equipment out of a boat in the marina and then run with it across the city. She looked down at herself. All right. I can. It's not too hard. But I should probably put on some pants. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Lawrence, aka Skiff, polling as the #1 most popular hero on the Chicago team since February and enjoying a contract-stipulated raise as a result, had recently bought a historic 6-bedroom house near Montrose Beach. He'd hoped, that the promise of a ton of space and spare bedrooms would lure his parents or his older brother into more frequent visits. So far they hadn't come. Christmas could happen, though. Maybe. Saturdays were always crammed with events, so he had to wake up hours before dawn if he wanted a little personal time. He ate a cold beef sandwich in his new formal dining room and watched a recorded broadcast from Madrid on his interface while he answered fan mail. Chicago kept telling him to let an assistant do this, one who would PR the letters to death. And the Anisidran government funded a service for high-profile Avowed that would also do the job, better, faster, and more subtly, if he wanted his fans PR'd to death in a slightly different way. But no. Emails and handwritten replies from the real Skiff were going to be a thing. Even though he was behind by a few months. Look at him, he said in annoyance as a familiar face appeared on the broadcast. The man was modeling one of Madrid's new hero ensembles. It was Hoopa-inspired. So fun. Sebastian, you dumb jerk. Smile. They gave you a feathered cape and a headdress, and you look like you're at a funeral. His old roommate swished the cape half-heartedly, and Skiff rolled his eyes before shutting his interface off so he could focus. That reminds me, he thought as he turned his attention back to the letter he was writing, I have to talk to that company that wants to sell Skifflops about renaming them if they want me to take them seriously. He finished 5 letters, writing quickly. As he was approaching the end of the 6th, there was a loud banging on his door. At this time, it was way too late, or way too early if you looked at it that way, for it to be for normal job reasons. Something had to be wrong. Why didn't they just call? He stood up, but before he could leave the table, a wash of false red coated the room, courtesy of his interface, and he dropped his pen in surprise. Emergency orders issued. Fuck. It had happened. He was going to another planet. And not for an awesome money-making adventure with some wild wizards like a couple of years ago. Emergency. The real deal. They were going to make him fight something. A demon. An evil wizard. Or deflot something awful like a chemical plant full of toxic magical fumes. I'm wearing board shorts. They have to gear me up for emergencies, don't they? If there are fumes I get a gas mask. That's their responsibility. Now Mom will be sorry she didn't come see the new house when I begged. Summons to Lima family neighborhood, F-City, Ansidora. Teleport in 9 seconds. Huh? I'm going home. 9 seconds later, he was gone. The letter he'd left on the table, almost done, was in reply to a little girl whose sister had died in a car accident. Why, she'd asked, didn't the system save her? Why didn't it send you to stop the other driver? My mom says it doesn't work like that, but my aunt says it could if it wanted to. I hope my letter doesn't bother you. I went off the high dive at the pool because I saw you talk about how not to be afraid of that on Skiff says. Please write back. ****. Dear Tanwick, I'm proud of you for going off the high dive. And for being brave enough to ask hard questions. And I'm so sorry about your sister. There aren't any answers that will make you stop missing her and feeling sad about what happened. And I'll probably only be able to tell you things you already know. The system is a very amazing part of our planet. It allows us to talk to the rest of the universe, and it gives us a way to learn about people we would never in 1,000 human lifetimes be able to meet without it. You may have heard of the Artonans using it to help during serious disasters. Or you may have heard that on Anzidora, where most of us live, we use it the way people here in Chicago use ambulances, to get to the hospital when we're hurt or get to safety when we're in trouble. Because of agreements with the true planets in the system, Earth gets teleportation allowances for humans to use in all kinds of different helpful ways. Anzidora has a larger allowance than most places, but even Avowed can't always teleport whenever we'd like. There have been times when the allowance was used up, and there was no more left for people who needed help. That's always very hard. A hopeful thing to think about is the fact that the teleportation allowances have been growing ever since the system first became a part of Earth. Under Tona I, II, and III, they have teleportation centers in alcoves all over the place. Someday, Earth might be like that. And you may be able to use the system for a trip to the other side of the world yourself, just because you'd like to travel. And we'll be able to save more people who need help. But for now, I try to remember that the system isn't strong enough to fix everything, everywhere. And it's not meant to do that for us. It has important jobs to do that we can't always imagine. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Official order. Apply life jacket spell impression to designated human beings. Not objects. Are you sure? If I make a sunken boat float again, a lot of people can ride on it. I am sure. It's sure, Jeffy reported to the others who stood in the warming room that had been set up in the TC for cold, wet red halos who were in between tasks. Does he get paid extra for every individual order it has to issue? A man murmured in Chinese. Is that the most important thing right now? Someone else said in the same language. He's actually good in the water. Official order, rescue people from flooded location and direct them toward shelter. Follow instructions from assigned partner. Teleport in 6 seconds. Teleport us directly into water. Yesenia. Jeffy said to the woman beside him. Yes, Jeffy. We've got this, she said, winking one aquamarine eye at him. Brute diverse go. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. It was a summer night at Leaf Song, and the hungry cup flowers were feasting on the members of the Clerm swarm that hadn't been repelled by the spells coating the campus. Their staccato screeches were almost loud enough to drown out the conversation of 2 wizards who strolled a pathway between darkened buildings. An ancient sinker center, almost certainly driven by half-witted humans feeding it nonsensical directions, fragmented into minute particles and ejected into the ocean of a foreign planet by a shield built on reversal theory rather than nullification. The speaker clicked her throat in a mix of interest and disapproval. It sounds like a problem from one of Exalted Master Giaco Tim's proving tests, her companion said. Do you remember how we set aside a room just for moaning that year? The screams. The stress sweat. I think discussing the response of the nascent contract will be a good topic for the winter meeting. Maybe. We'll see when it's over. Right now, I'm just hoping that this somehow leads to the loosening of summoning restrictions on the species rather than even tighter ones. One of the campus's automated carts approached from behind them and then passed. The lone first-year student riding in it didn't look their way. Wasn't that? Yes. Where is he going in such a hurry at this hour? Line of asterisks. Cena Stewart stepped off the cart and headed toward the domed, windowless black stone building. He didn't pause to properly straighten his student uniform, and when the door opened for him, he didn't hesitate to head around the curved hall that formed the hot lab's perimeter. Young Stewart said Warley Roden, looking up from his desk as the primary's son entered his office. You must have so many questions about your class's recent exploration of the fourth bowel. You aren't answering your messages in a timely manner, Stuart said in a rush. He leaned over the professor's desk. Rodin's eye flicked behind his monocle. The last message you sent was a mere 4, and I don't think anyone else on campus will come deliver news to you when that news might help you to shed a portion of your great shame. You are such a charming conversationalist. I've missed an opportunity by not chatting socially with you before. Something is happening on Earth that puts many about at risk, said Stuart A large magical spill of some kind in their ocean. Volunteers are gathering in the Grand Senate Sinking Hall now to be sworn to task. If you head to the seminarium immediately, you will arrive in time to join them. Rodin froze. It must be difficult for you to commit highly visible acts of service to the triplanets while monitoring student explorations of fourth bowels, Stuart said, staring at him. Well, that's not untrue. But why would you? I brought you a card. Tobe continued.